The valet reached for my tactical pack before I even stepped through the open iron gate. "I'll take that, ma'am." I tightened my grip. "No, you won't." He looked confused, apologized under his breath, and hurried toward a black Bentley rolling into the driveway instead. I stood there for another second, staring at the mansion where I grew up. 6 months earlier, my helicopter disappeared over hostile territory during a classified rescue mission in the Horn of Africa. We went down hard. The emergency beacon failed. By every public record, Captain Sloan Sterling had simply vanished. The last thing I expected to see when I finally made it home was a party. Music floated across the front lawn. A string quartet played beside the fountain. Caterers carried silver trays through groups of men wearing custom tuxedos and women covered in enough diamonds to finance a small town. The house wasn't mourning, it was celebrating something. That realization settled in before I even took another step. The security guard at the front entrance didn't recognize me. That wasn't surprising. My hair was shorter. My face carried fresh scars. I'd lost almost 20 pounds surviving 6 months with a rescue team that was trying just as hard to stay alive as I was. He smiled politely. "Invitation, please." "I don't have one." "I'm sorry, tonight is private." My own family home. I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded and walked away as if I had made a mistake. Military training teaches you something civilians rarely think about. The front door is usually the worst way into any building. The eastern side of the property backed against a line of ancient live oaks overlooking the river. I'd spent half my childhood climbing those trees whenever my parents hosted another charity dinner that really existed to impress people richer than themselves. Some things never changed. Even the loose section of the wrought iron fence behind the old boathouse was exactly where I remembered. I slipped through without making a sound. The air smelled like cut grass, salt water, expensive perfume, and grilled filet mignon. Someone laughed loud enough to echo across the garden. Not once did I hear anyone speaking quietly about the daughter they believed had died overseas. That bothered me more than I expected. Combat teaches you not to expect dramatic reunions. You learn to accept disappointment before hope. Still, I thought there would at least be pictures, flowers, something. Anything. Instead, I found another valet joking with guests about where to park a Ferrari worth more than my military pension would pay in 10 years. I stayed behind the trees and watched servers refill crystal champagne glasses. One waiter carried a tray of Glenhaven Reserve 28-year scotch. Dad hated spending more than $80 on a bottle. Tonight he was serving something that cost nearly $2,900 each. Business must have improved. Or someone had found another source of money. That thought refused to leave my head. There was something wrong about this entire night. I couldn't explain it yet, but years of reconnaissance had taught me to trust the quiet alarms inside my own mind. When every detail looks normal, look for the one detail everyone wants you to ignore. Mine came 20 seconds later. A massive banner hung across the ballroom entrance. The lights kept reflecting against it, making it difficult to read from where I stood. I moved closer through the hedges. Only part of the lettering became visible. Foundation? For what? I couldn't read the rest without exposing myself. Whatever that banner meant, it had something to do with tonight. And somehow, I already knew it had something to do with me. I stayed low behind a row of trimmed hedges while guests continued arriving. A man wearing a Savannah Harbor Club blazer greeted another guest. "So glad the Sterling family finally has some peace after everything." The other man nodded sympathetically. "They've shown incredible strength." Strength? Interesting choice of words. My mother had always believed appearances mattered more than facts. She used to spend 3 hours arranging flowers before charity luncheons while yelling at the kitchen staff because one napkin wasn't folded correctly. If she wanted people to believe a story, she rehearsed every detail. That memory made the banner bother me even more. The front doors opened again. A photographer hurried backward, snapping pictures. Everyone turned toward the entrance, including me. My mother stepped outside wearing an ivory evening gown that definitely wasn't in her closet the last time I saw her. Around her neck rested a diamond necklace so enormous it looked uncomfortable. She laughed, not politely, not carefully. She threw her head back and laughed the way people do when they don't have a single worry left in the world. A woman beside her raised a champagne glass. Lenore clinked hers against it. Then another. People surrounded her, complimenting her, smiling, telling stories. One guest even squeezed her hand while saying something that made both of them laugh again. I searched her face. Maybe grief looked different now. Maybe she'd been crying earlier. Maybe… No, there wasn't a trace. No swollen eyes. No forced smile. No exhaustion. Nothing. The woman raising vintage champagne beneath the lights looked happier than I had seen her in years. I stayed hidden beneath the old oak trees while my own mother celebrated in the same house, where she'd once told me, family always comes before business. For the first time since surviving that helicopter crash, I felt something far colder than fear. Someone inside this mansion had built an entire new reality during the 6 months I was gone. And judging by the smiles on every face around those champagne glasses, my return was about to destroy it. The answer was somewhere inside that house, and before this night was over, I intended to find it. That single banner, the celebration, and the strange confidence on my mother's face were pieces of the same puzzle. And I wasn't leaving Savannah until I uncovered exactly what they had buried beneath my name. I kept moving before anyone had a chance to notice the figure standing beneath the oak trees. The guest house above the old boathouse hadn't changed much since I left. My parents rarely came near it unless they had relatives staying for the holidays. And even then, they complained. The stairs were too narrow and the view wasn't impressive enough. That made it the safest place on the property for someone who didn't officially exist anymore. The brass key was still taped beneath the third railing post exactly where I'd hidden it years ago after locking myself out one summer. Some habits outlive entire careers. The door opened with the same soft creak I remembered. Everything inside smelled like cedar, old books, and furniture polish. A white sheet still covered the sofa. Dust rested on the windowsill, which told me nobody had been living here recently. Good. I locked the door behind me. My tactical pack landed beside the desk. Most people assumed soldiers carried nothing but weapons. Mine held something far more valuable: a hardened military laptop, an encrypted drive, backup authentication tokens, paper copies of emergency credentials sealed inside waterproof sleeves. Before every classified deployment, we prepared for the possibility that official systems would fail us. Tonight, I was grateful someone had drilled that habit into me. The laptop came alive after a fingerprint scan. No network. Expected. I connected the portable satellite modem that had traveled halfway around the world inside my pack. 38 seconds later, the secure connection stabilized. I started with military casualty records. Nothing. That wasn't unusual. Classified operations often lagged behind public reporting. Next came state public records, property ownership, tax filings, corporate registrations. Everything looked normal until I searched my own name, Sloan Elizabeth Sterling. The first result stopped me cold. Status, DCID. I read it again. Then a third time. No change. According to the state of Georgia, I was dead. My heartbeat stayed steady. People think military training removes emotion. It doesn't. It simply teaches you not to let emotion decide your next move. I opened the supporting documents. Certificate of Death in Action, filed. Approved, recorded. The issue date caught my attention immediately. 4 weeks after our helicopter disappeared. 4 weeks. That wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. When service members disappear during combat operations, there are procedures, investigations, missing status reviews, identity verification. Military casualty assistance officers don't simply skip half the process because someone's family wants closure. Someone had accelerated this. I opened another file, supporting identification, dental records. I leaned closer to the screen. Those weren't mine. They looked convincing. Correct military format, correct clinic, correct provider signature. But I knew my own dental history better than anyone forging paperwork ever could. The chart listed a crown on tooth number 19. I'd never had one. Instead, I'd received a ceramic restoration on 18 after a training accident at Fort Campbell almost 9 years earlier. Small mistake. Huge consequence. Whoever assembled these documents had access to military templates, but not my actual treatment records. That meant forgery, professional forgery. I saved copies onto an encrypted drive before continuing. Next came insurance, Alliance Mutual Global, life insurance policy, beneficiary review, claim submitted, claim approved pending final release. Coverage amount, $3,000,000. I sat back slowly. $3 million. Enough to solve a lot of financial problems. Enough to tempt people who believed money fixed everything. Enough to explain the expensive champagne outside. The submission package contained dozens of supporting documents. Letters, affidavits, legal certifications. Most looked prepared by attorneys. Someone had invested serious effort into convincing an insurance company that Captain Sloane Sterling would never be coming home. I followed the digital trail. One document referenced emergency authorization through political channels. Another included expedited verification requests sent to federal offices. Someone had been making phone calls. Powerful phone calls. I recognized one name attached to an authorization request. Judge Harold Baines. Dad played golf with him twice every month. Interesting. Another signature belonged to a retired county medical examiner. He'd attended our family Christmas parties for years. Connections, influence, favors, everything fit together too neatly. I kept digging: corporate records, trust accounts, foundation registrations. One newly created nonprofit appeared only 18 days after my death certificate became official. The Sterling Legacy Memorial Foundation. Public mission, supporting military families. Tax designation approved. Executive Director, Lenore Sterling. Of course. Mom always loved being photographed beside oversized donation checks. The financial disclosures were still incomplete, but one number stood out. Administrative startup allocation, $2,847,500. Almost identical to the insurance proceeds after legal fees. I didn't need forensic accountants to understand what I was looking at. Someone intended to move insurance money into a charitable organization carrying my name. Whether it ever reached military families was another question entirely. My stomach tightened. Not because of the fraud. Because I realized something much worse. Nobody inside that mansion expected me to walk back through the front door. They hadn't prepared for mistakes because they believed there would never be anyone left to challenge them. Confidence creates sloppy criminals. I opened the final attachment, insurance completed payout request. Every required signature occupied the last page. Claim administrator, witness. Legal counsel, beneficiary. Then my eyes stopped. Lenore Sterling. Her signature curved across the paper in dark blue ink. Elegant, confident, perfectly centered. I knew every letter. She had signed every permission slip when I was growing up. Every school form, every birthday card. Every Mother's Day note she'd asked me to mail for my grandmother because her wrist hurt. There was no doubt this was hers. My eyes drifted upward to the date. 28 days after my helicopter disappeared. 28 days. Before any legitimate military declaration could have reached that conclusion. Before anyone could honestly know whether I was alive. She hadn't waited for certainty. She had signed anyway. I reached over, connected the small travel printer from my pack, and pressed one button. The machine hummed quietly, one page, then another. The final insurance certification slid into the output tray. I picked it up carefully, holding the paper by its edges as though it were evidence at a crime scene. Because that's exactly what it was. Outside, I could still hear distant laughter from the Gala. Crystal glasses clinked together. Someone applauded. A violin climbed into another cheerful melody. Inside the quiet guest house, I stared at my mother's signature until the truth became impossible to soften. My parents hadn't mourned me. They had processed me. Somewhere between the helicopter crash and tonight's celebration, my life had been reduced to a claim number, a balance sheet, and a $3 million transaction. I folded the document once, slipped it into a waterproof evidence sleeve, and set it beside my service credentials. From that moment on, I wasn't walking through my childhood home as a daughter hoping for answers. I was walking in as the only living witness to a fraud built on my own death. I slipped the insurance claim into my pack, zipped it shut, and headed back toward the mansion before I could talk myself into believing there had to be another explanation. There wasn't. People don't accidentally forge military records. They don't accidentally convince an insurance company to release $3 million. And they definitely don't accidentally sign paperwork declaring their daughter dead 4 weeks after she disappears. I stayed off the stone walkways and crossed behind the hedges until I reached the row of French doors facing the grand ballroom. The curtains were tied back. From where I stood, I could see almost the entire room without anyone seeing me. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors. At least 300 guests filled the ballroom. I recognized local judges, shipping executives, bankers, city council members, and half the board of the Savannah Maritime Association. Dad hadn't invited friends. He'd invited witnesses. Servers moved through the crowd carrying champagne and tiny crab cakes balanced on silver trays. Near the front stood an enormous projector screen. For one strange second, I thought it might display the company's latest shipping expansion. Instead, my own face appeared. It was my official army portrait. Dress uniform, hair perfectly pinned. A small smile that barely qualified as one. The photograph had been taken after I pinned on Captain several years earlier. Someone had enlarged it to nearly 15 feet tall. Below it hung a banner, the Sterling Legacy Memorial Foundation, serving military families through honor. I almost laughed. If irony made noise, that ballroom would have exploded. The string quartet stopped playing. The room settled into polite silence. My father stepped onto the stage first. His tuxedo probably cost more than my first pickup truck. He tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for joining us tonight." Applause. He smiled with practiced humility. "Our family has experienced unimaginable loss." A woman in the front row reached for a tissue before he had even finished the sentence. Professional audience. Professional performance. Dad continued. "My daughter served this nation with courage few of us will ever understand." That part, at least, was true. "We cannot bring her home." False. "But all can honor her memory." The applause came louder this time. He welcomed my mother to the stage. Lenore walked forward slowly. She wore a black evening gown tailored perfectly enough to belong on a magazine cover. Around her neck rested the diamond collar I'd noticed outside. From this distance, I could see it clearly. Large, flawless stones wrapped almost completely around her neck. That wasn't family jewelry. Mom believed heirlooms should stay in a safe. She only bought new pieces when she wanted people to notice them. I remembered enough from Dad's business dinners to estimate the value. Around $150,000. Maybe more. An interesting purchase for a grieving mother. She accepted the microphone. For several seconds, she simply looked at my photograph. Then her shoulders trembled, right on cue. "My beautiful Sloane." Her voice cracked. Someone in the audience sniffled. She dabbed one eye with a folded handkerchief. Not enough to disturb her makeup, just enough to suggest tears. When your child chooses to wear our country's uniform, pause. Every day becomes an act of faith. Another pause. You pray for the phone not to ring. The audience stayed perfectly quiet. I watched her carefully. I'd spent 32 years reading her expressions. Nothing about this was spontaneous. Every breath, every pause, every glance toward my portrait, rehearsed. She continued speaking about service, duty, sacrifice. She thanked military families, she thanked veterans, she thanked God. Then she thanked the Savannah community for standing beside the Sterling family during our darkest months. Darkest months. That explained the gala. This wasn't simply a fundraiser. It was reputation management. She was transforming my supposed death into social capital. One donor at a time, one standing ovation at a time. Then came the sentence that made several guests stand to applaud. Although Sloane can no longer serve this nation herself, her legacy will continue serving generations to come. She extended one hand toward the projector. Our family is proud to establish the Sterling Legacy Memorial Foundation. The ballroom erupted. People stood, glasses lifted. Several guests wiped away tears. A photographer captured every angle. Flash after flash illuminated the room. Mom smiled modestly while accepting the applause. I looked beyond her. A large presentation slide appeared on the screen. Most people saw photographs. I saw paperwork. Years of military planning had trained me to notice structure before decoration. The slide listed the foundation's governing board. Lenore Sterling, Chairwoman, Garrick Sterling. Treasurer, Wyatt Sterling. Director of Strategic Development, no independent directors, no veteran representative. No military nonprofit advisor, no outside financial oversight. Odd. The next displayed funding. Initial endowment, $3 million. Expected administrative allocation, 94% during organizational launch. I frowned. 94%? Legitimate charities don't consume nearly all their assets before helping anyone. The legal language underneath confirmed my suspicion. Operating entity managed through Sterling Family Capital Management LLC. Consulting agreements, asset administration, property acquisition, executive compensation review. There it was. Not hidden. Just buried beneath enough corporate language that most guests would never question it. This wasn't structured like a military charity. It resembled holding companies I'd seen federal investigators dismantle during financial crime briefings. Money enters. Management companies collect fees. Assets transfer between related entities. Taxes shrink. Paper trails multiply. Eventually, nobody can explain where the original money went. The insurance payout wasn't funding a memorial. It was disappearing into a carefully designed corporate maze controlled entirely by my family. A shell wrapped inside another shell. Neat. Legal-looking. Completely dishonest. A retired banker near the stage leaned toward another guest. Garrick always did understand tax strategy. The other man chuckled. He certainly knows how to protect family wealth, if only they knew how accurate that sentence really was. Mom raised her champagne glass. Tonight, we celebrate not only sacrifice. She smiled toward my portrait, but the responsibility of carrying that sacrifice forward. The audience answered with another standing ovation. Hidden beyond the French doors, I rested one hand against the cold glass and studied every face in the ballroom. Some people were genuinely moved. Some probably intended to donate. Some believed they were honoring a fallen army captain. None of them realized they were applauding an organization built on forged records, political favors, and an insurance claim signed while the woman they were memorializing was still fighting to stay alive. The foundation wasn't preserving my legacy. It was laundering my death into respectability. And as the applause echoed through the ballroom, I understood that exposing a fraudulent insurance claim would only be the beginning. If I walked into that room, I wouldn't just be confronting my parents. I'd be tearing apart an entire performance that every influential person in Savannah had already started believing. I stepped away from the ballroom windows before anyone inside happened to glance toward the garden. I already had enough evidence to prove my parents had declared me dead. Now I needed to understand why they had been willing to risk everything. The answer wasn't in the ballroom. It was somewhere behind the performance. The library sat on the west side of the house, tucked behind my father's office. Growing up, it had been the quietest room in the mansion. Dad claimed he loved books. In reality, he loved displaying expensive first editions that nobody was allowed to touch. As I approached the hallway, I heard voices. Low, sharp. Not the polished voices they'd been using in front of donors. Real voices. I stopped outside the partially closed door. I'm telling you, they're running out of patience. Wyatt. He sounded nothing like the confident older brother who loved showing off during family dinners. Dad answered immediately. Keep your voice down. I'm trying. No, you're panicking. I have every reason to panic. Silence settled for a second. I eased closer until I could see through the narrow opening. Wyatt paced beside the fireplace, tugging at his tie so hard it looked ready to snap. His hair, usually styled within an inch of perfection, had started falling across his forehead. Dad stood behind his desk with both hands planted on the polished wood. He wasn't angry yet, he was calculating. I spoke with Singapore yesterday, Wyatt said. They're finished with me. What exactly did they say? They froze every operating account. Dad closed his eyes for a moment. And Rotterdam? Gone. Dubai? They've already started arbitration. Another long silence. I'd never seen Wyatt look genuinely frightened before. As kids, he'd always been the favorite. When he crashed Dad's vintage sailboat at 19, it became an unfortunate learning experience. When I broke a kitchen window throwing baseballs with neighborhood kids, I spent 2 months paying for the replacement. Different standards. Always. Wyatt rubbed both hands across his face. I thought the crypto logistics platform was going to work. Dad didn't respond. I had investors. Still nothing. I had projections. Dad finally spoke. You had fantasies. Wyatt looked away. The market collapsed. No. Dad's voice stayed surprisingly calm. You collapsed. I couldn't predict what happened. You couldn't manage a lemonade stand. For the first time in years, I almost felt sorry for my brother. Almost. Then I remembered the foundation carrying my name. The sympathy disappeared. Wyatt reached into his jacket and tossed a folded packet onto the desk. Dad opened it. Even from the doorway, I recognized several legal forms. Demand letters, collection notices. One page carried the logo of a federal bankruptcy court. Dad flipped through them rapidly. How much? Wyatt hesitated. Dad looked up. How much? $18.4 million. The number hung in the room. Dad slowly removed his reading glasses. 18.4. I was leveraging future shipping contracts. You were gambling. I was investing. You were gambling while calling it innovation. Wyatt slammed both hands onto the desk. I was trying to build something of my own. You built debt. I was trying to make you proud. Dad laughed once. It wasn't amused. It sounded tired. I stopped expecting that years ago. Wyatt stared at the floor. I thought I could recover before anyone noticed, and instead, the auditors noticed. Those 4 words changed everything. Dad straightened. The auditors. I heard that part. Wyatt swallowed. The internal audit uncovered transfers. How many? I don't know. Stop lying. They found 6. Dad's jaw tightened. There were 12. I moved the other 6 back. With what money? Wyatt didn't answer. Dad already knew. So you covered one theft with another. I was buying time. You were manufacturing evidence. I listened carefully. This wasn't simply a failed startup. This was corporate embezzlement. Wyatt had been pulling money out of Sterling Maritime Holdings to keep his offshore logistics company alive. No wonder everyone looked so polished tonight. Desperate people often dress well. Dad walked around the desk slowly. When does this become public? Wyatt answered without looking up. Monday morning. What time? The board meets at 9. And federal investigators? They already requested financial records. Dad nodded once. So we have less than 48 hours, maybe less. And Alliance Mutual? They said the insurance funds should clear immediately after tonight's ceremony. There it was, the missing piece. The $3 million insurance payout wasn't just greed. It was emergency cash. Money they hoped would patch enough holes to delay an investigation. Not permanently, just long enough to survive another week. Dad stared toward the ballroom where applause echoed faintly through the walls. 3 million won't fix 18. I know, it buys time. I know, it might convince creditors to wait. I know, Dad leaned closer. And if that payment disappears? Wyatt finally looked him in the eyes. We're finished. No speeches. No excuses. Just the truth. The company wasn't standing on decades of successful shipping. It was balancing on the assumption that I remained dead. Dad reached for the front of Wyatt's tuxedo, his fingers wrapped around the expensive fabric. Then he yanked Wyatt forward so hard that one polished dress shoe slid across the hardwood floor. You listen to me. His voice dropped low enough that I barely heard it. Your sister spent her life cleaning up everyone else's disasters. Wyatt didn't answer. And now, Dad's grip tightened. Even her death is cleaning up yours. The words landed harder than any shout. Dad wasn't grieving. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't even pretending anymore. He continued through clenched teeth. Do you understand what her sacrifice bought us? Wyatt whispered, yes. It kept this family name out of a federal penitentiary. Another pause. It kept your mother out of handcuffs. Another. It kept you from spending the next 15 years explaining wire transfers to prosecutors. He pulled Wyatt even closer. So if you lose that insurance money because you panic, his voice became almost cold enough to match mine. Then your sister died for absolutely nothing. I closed my eyes for one steady breath. Not because the words hurt, because they clarified everything. My father didn't see me as his daughter. He saw me as a financial event, a line item that had temporarily stabilized a collapsing balance sheet. Outside the library, the orchestra began another elegant waltz while guests celebrated the Sterling family's generosity. Inside, the man who had taught me to salute the American flag had just admitted that my supposed death was nothing more than a convenient asset, keeping his empire alive. And for the first time that night, I stopped wondering whether exposing them would destroy my family. I realized there wasn't a family left to destroy. I let the library door close behind me without making a sound, and for the first time since stepping onto the property, I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like an officer. Emotion had already given me every answer I needed. Now I needed discipline. The guest house felt even quieter than before. The distant music from the Gala drifted across the river, muffled enough to sound unreal. I locked the door again and placed my tactical pack on the bed. Beside it sat a large white garment bag. My name was written neatly on the luggage tag. Sterling. Someone had actually prepared clothes for me. Curious, I unzipped it. Inside hung a black designer cocktail dress with the original boutique tag still attached. Price $4,860, matching heels, a pearl bracelet, even a small evening clutch. I couldn't help shaking my head. They had planned everything, not my return. My appearance. If I somehow came home after the insurance money cleared, they probably expected me to smile for a few family photographs, accept some carefully rehearsed explanation, and quietly disappear until their lawyers finished cleaning up the paperwork. The dress wasn't a gift. It was a costume. I zipped the garment bag shut without another glance. Then I reached for the military footlocker that had traveled with me through 3 deployments. The green steel corners were scratched. One latch still carried a dent from when it slammed against the helicopter floor during our last mission. I unlocked it. Inside, everything remained exactly where I'd packed it before deployment. Field manuals, service records, photographs of my platoon, a folded American flag presented to my unit after one of our medevac operations, and beneath everything else, my Army service uniform. I lifted it carefully with both hands. The fabric still smelled faintly of cedar from the garment cover. I laid it across the bed and looked over every inch. Combat teaches you that details matter. Loose stitching becomes torn equipment. Dirty optics become missed targets. Small mistakes become permanent ones. I plugged in the old travel iron that I always carried. 5 minutes later, steam drifted slowly across the room as I worked methodically over every sleeve, every seam, every crease. No rushing, no shortcuts. Outside, people applauded another speech. Inside, I concentrated on a wrinkle barely visible near the left cuff. The routine settled my breathing. Some soldiers pray before difficult missions. Others clean equipment. I've always trusted routine. When the uniform was ready, I opened the small velvet case containing my awards. The Purple Heart. I ran my thumb lightly along the ribbon before attaching it. That medal had come from a roadside explosion years before anyone thought. My name belonged on a memorial foundation. The Combat Action Badge came next. I remembered exactly where I'd earned it. Not because of the firefight, because afterward one of our youngest medics had asked whether his hands were supposed to shake that much. I told him mine were shaking too. We both lied. Then came the Bronze Star with Valor device. People who had never served often stared at it with curiosity. They imagined dramatic movie scenes. They never imagined what actually stayed with you. The silence after rotor blades stopped. The empty seat inside an aircraft. The names you still remembered years later. Awards don't erase those memories. They simply remind you that someone else saw what happened. I fastened the final pin and stepped back. The uniform looked complete, professional, uncomplicated, honest. More honest than anything happening inside the mansion. I changed slowly. Every button, every clasp, every insignia went exactly where Army regulations required. When I finished, I checked everything again. Then, once more, old habits. My phone vibrated once. No signal from the military network, only local service. A news notification flashed across the screen. Sterling family hosts military memorial gala supporting veterans. I opened the article. A photograph filled the display. My mother smiling beneath my portrait. My father shaking hands with city officials. The caption praised their commitment to honoring America's fallen heroes. I laughed quietly. Not because it was funny. Because the reporter had unknowingly photographed one of the biggest frauds in Savannah. I took a screenshot and saved it with the insurance documents. Evidence came in many forms. I checked my watch. Still time. Enough to observe. Enough to choose the right moment. Never rush an objective simply because you're angry. That lesson had kept people alive overseas. It could keep me focused here. I slipped the evidence folder into the inside pocket of my uniform. The printed insurance claim fit perfectly. Then I added the forged dental records, foundation registration, corporate filings. Everything stayed flat against my chest, almost symbolic. Their lies were literally resting over the medals I'd earned. As I adjusted my jacket, something caught my attention. The small leather notebook tucked into the footlocker. My deployment notebook. I flipped through pages filled with coordinates, supply counts, and medical reminders until I reached the final entry before our helicopter crashed. One sentence. Bring everyone home if you can. No signature, no speech. Just a reminder I'd written to myself. I closed the notebook. Tonight, bringing everyone home wasn't possible, but bringing the truth home was. Before leaving, I switched off every light except the lamp near the window. From outside, the room would appear occupied but quiet. One more habit learned during reconnaissance. Small misdirection often buys valuable minutes. I walked toward the window overlooking the garden. The glass reflected someone I hadn't seen in months. Not the exhausted survivor who had stumbled out of hostile territory. Not the daughter searching for an explanation. An Army captain stood in front of me, uniform pressed. Purple Heart aligned perfectly. Combat Action Badge centered. Bronze Star with Valor catching the soft light from the lamp. My face carried fresh scars my parents had never seen. My eyes carried something they wouldn't recognize either. Acceptance. There would be no emotional argument tonight. No pleading. No desperate attempt to repair a family that had already traded me for a financial transaction. I studied my reflection one final time until every trace of hesitation disappeared behind the calm discipline the army had spent years teaching me. The woman looking back wasn't preparing for revenge. She was preparing for one final reconnaissance mission inside the only battlefield that had ever asked her to salute people who never deserved it. As I reached for the doorknob, one thought crossed my mind. What was about to happen was unbelievable on its own, but it reminded me of another family deception we've covered before. If you're watching between minutes 45 and 55, keep an eye on the top right corner of your screen. You'll see that story waiting there, and you'll understand why these betrayals often follow the same pattern. I closed the guest house door behind me without making a sound and headed toward the mansion through the narrow stone path that cut across the rose garden. The orchestra inside had started another piece. Laughter drifted through the open ballroom windows. Somewhere near the fountain, someone proposed another toast, and a wave of applause rolled across the lawn. I kept walking. The evidence folder rested inside my uniform jacket. Every step felt steady. Not rushed, not hesitant. About halfway to the main house, I heard heels striking the stone walkway. Fast, uneven. Someone wasn't strolling through the garden. Someone was looking for privacy. I stepped behind a row of tall rose bushes, just as the figure rounded the corner. My mother. Lenore held a champagne flute in one hand while the other clutched her phone. Her smile was gone. She looked irritated, probably escaping another donor who wanted 10 more minutes of conversation. She stopped to answer a text. The screen lit her face. She sighed. I swear, if Clayton delays that presentation another. She looked up. Our eyes met. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered across the stone path. For nearly 5 full seconds, neither of us moved. Every trace of color disappeared from her face. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She took one slow step backward. No, another step. No, she shook her head. This isn't. Her breathing became shallow. I buried you. The words landed harder than she probably intended. Not I missed you. Not you're alive. I buried you. I answered quietly. No, you. Her voice trembled. They identified paperwork. Gornfrom. She stared without blinking. You can't be here. I am. This isn't possible. It seems possible enough. She backed into the iron garden bench. One hand grabbed the edge to steady herself. Her eyes never left mine. You, she swallowed. You're dead. I had a different experience. For one unexpected moment, I almost saw the mother I remembered. The frightened woman standing in front of me looked genuinely overwhelmed. Then she reached forward with shaking fingers, almost cautiously, as though she needed proof. Her hand touched my sleeve, then my wrist. Cold skin, solid, real. She jerked her hand away as if she'd touched electricity. The fear vanished. It didn't fade. It disappeared instantly. Something colder replaced it. Calculation. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders straightened. Her voice returned. Not loving. Not relieved. Sloane. She glanced toward the ballroom. Come over here. I didn't move. She lowered her voice. Not another word. Still nothing from me. She stepped closer instead. You have no idea what's happening. I have a pretty good idea. No. She looked around again to make sure nobody was nearby. You understand pieces. I understand forged records. Her expression hardened. I understand a death certificate. Sloane. I understand $3 million. She flinched. I understand a foundation. Her jaw tightened. And I understand your signature. Silence. The music from inside continued as though nothing unusual was happening 30 yards away. Finally, she exhaled. You accessed the files. Yes, I told your father the guest house should have been cleared. Interesting. Not surprise, not denial. She accepted the evidence almost immediately. You forged military documentation. We did what had to be done. You declared me dead. You were missing. I was alive. We didn't know that. You decided not to wait. She rubbed her forehead. You don't understand the pressure we were under. I almost smiled. Every criminal eventually explains why the rules shouldn't have applied to them. She took another careful step. I'm listening. I know how this looks. It looks like insurance fraud. It looks like survival. For whom? I folded my arms. Explain? She actually seemed relieved. Negotiation. This was territory she understood. Your father built Sterling Maritime over 35 years. I know. Thousands of families depend on that company. I know. If it collapses, she let the sentence hang. People lose jobs. That's your argument? I'm telling you what's at stake. No. I shook my head. You're telling me what matters to you. She ignored that. The insurance claim is almost complete. I noticed. The audit hasn't officially closed. I noticed that too. Her eyes brightened slightly. She thought she had found common ground. If nothing changes tonight, everything settles within days, and then we fix this. I laughed. A quiet, tired laugh. You fix me? We arrange your return. Arrange. Interesting word. What exactly does that mean? We announced there was a classified mistake. After collecting $3 million, there are legal procedures. For returning from the dead, we have attorneys. I'm sure you do. She stepped even closer until only a few feet separated us. Sloane, her voice softened. You've survived 6 months in impossible conditions. Yes, you can survive another week. There it is. What? The real request. She looked away for a second before answering. I need you to help us. Help you commit fraud? Help us finish the process. I couldn't believe how naturally the words came out of her mouth, as if asking me to postpone my own existence was no different from asking me to reschedule dinner. She reached into her evening purse and removed several folded bills. Cash. She pressed them toward me. There are taxis waiting near the east entrance. I stared at the money. I already booked a room. Of course she had. At the Harbor Crest Motel, I actually recognized it. A roadside motel about 15 minutes away that mostly rented rooms by the week. You want me to hide there? Only temporarily. So your insurance company can finish paying you. It's more complicated than that. No, it really isn't. She pushed the cash closer. Take this, I didn't. I'll call you tomorrow. You don't have my number. We'll find you. You already did. She ignored the comment. Stay there. For how long? Until everything clears. Everything? The audit. She finally whispered the word. The insurance audit. There it was. Was no more pretending, no more speeches about grief, no more patriotic sacrifice, only money. Her eyes locked onto mine with desperate intensity. If you walk into that ballroom tonight, this family will be destroyed. She grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength. So, take a cheap taxi to the Harbor Crest. Stay in the motel. Wait for us to arrange your return. Just not tonight. I looked down at her hand resting on the same uniform she'd publicly honored only an hour earlier. Then I looked back into the eyes of the woman who had chosen paperwork over her own daughter. For the second time that evening, she wasn't asking me to come home. She was asking me to disappear. I let my mother's hand fall away from my sleeve and kept my eyes on hers, waiting to see whether she would finally recognize what she had become. Instead, I heard another pair of footsteps crossing the gravel, steady, deliberate. I didn't need to turn around. Only one person in this family walked like he owned every inch of ground beneath him. Gentlemen are asking where you are, Lenore. Dad stopped halfway down the path. His sentence died before he reached the last word. For the first time that night, Garrick Sterling looked directly at me. His eyes widened, just enough to register surprise. Then they narrowed again. Years ago, I watched him negotiate contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars from the same expression. He didn't panic. He calculated. Sloane. His voice remained flat. So, I waited. You're alive? I've been trying that for 32 years. He ignored the remark. His attention shifted briefly to my Army service uniform. His gaze paused on the Purple Heart. Then the Bronze Star with Valor. Then my face again. Not pride, not relief, assessment. Like he was reevaluating an unexpected business variable. Lenore rushed toward him. Garrick, she knows. I assumed she would. She found the files. I assumed that too. I almost admired the consistency. Nothing surprised him for more than 5 seconds. He folded his hands behind his back. You shouldn't be here. I smiled slightly. I had the impression this used to be my home. Don't be clever. I learned from you. His jaw tightened. We don't have time for this. No, we don't. He stepped closer until only a few feet separated us. I need you to listen carefully. I've been listening all evening. You've been reacting emotionally. There it was. The oldest trick in the book. If someone presents inconvenient facts, question their emotional stability. I've reviewed documents because you're traumatized. I've reviewed insurance filings. You've endured severe stress. I've reviewed forged records. Your judgment isn't reliable right now. I almost laughed. You really rehearsed this. He didn't deny it. Instead, he nodded once. 6 months, societal territory changes people. It does. I'm glad you admit that. It changes your tolerance for liars. His face hardened. Sloane. He spoke slowly, as though explaining something to a stubborn child. You are emotionally unstable. Lenore immediately joined in. We've been worried about exactly this, Dad continued. You've experienced unimaginable trauma. I have. So you're making impulsive decisions. No. I'm making documented observations. He ignored the correction. If you walk into that ballroom tonight, he gestured toward the mansion, you won't just embarrass this family. I wasn't aware embarrassment was the primary concern. You'll destroy Sterling Maritime. I looked at him. The company Wyatt robbed? His expression flickered for the first time. You overheard us. I did. He recovered immediately. Thousands of employees depend on this business. They depended on honest accounting too. This isn't about accounting. No, it's about fraud. His voice sharpened. It's about survival. Whose? Our families. I shook my head. My family didn't forge my death certificate. For a brief second, nobody spoke. The orchestra drifted faintly through the garden. Someone inside laughed. The contrast almost felt absurd. Dad changed tactics. If the insurance transfer collapses, I know. Banks move, I know. Credit lines disappear, I know. The board abandons us, I know. So then you understand. I understand exactly how much this house was worth to you. He stepped closer. No, you don't. His tone became colder than I'd ever heard it. You think this is about money. It is. It's about legacy. I looked toward the brightly lit mansion. The legacy where my obituary became a financial strategy. He didn't answer, because there wasn't one. Instead, he reached into his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper. I wasn't planning to show you this. He handed it toward me. I unfolded it. It was a benefits authorization. Military disability assistance. Recipient Sergeant Noah Mercer, my former squad mate. Noah had survived the same deployment. A mortar blast had taken most of his mobility in one leg. He'd spent months learning how to walk with advanced braces. My stomach tightened. Dad watched my expression carefully. I've been helping him. I looked up. You? He needed financial guidance. Noah never mentioned you. He wouldn't, because this never happened. Dad smiled faintly. It happened. I scanned the paperwork. Several charitable donations, private trust distributions, everything routed through Sterling Family Capital Management, of course. Another web, another layer. I can make one phone call tomorrow morning. He spoke calmly. The trust disappears. I met his eyes. You'd punish a disabled veteran. I'd stop funding someone who no longer has my support. He isn't your employee. No, but lawyers can be remarkably creative. Lenore quietly added. Please don't force your father into that position. Force him? I folded the paper neatly and handed it back. Dad continued. Noah depends on those payments. He depends on the Department of Veterans Affairs. He depends on several things. You forged this too, didn't you? He smiled again. Does it matter? Yes, it mattered. Because he'd just confirmed something important. He wasn't threatening me with facts. He was gambling that I wouldn't verify them first. Classic Garrick Sterling. Always assume pressure beats truth. I slowed my breathing, matched his pace, matched his posture. Years of military negotiations taught me something useful. The calmer person usually controls the conversation. He noticed. So, he crossed his arms. What's your decision? I looked past him toward the ballroom windows. Guests continued raising champagne in my memory. Then I looked back at the man who called himself my father. My squad mate survived mortar fire, Dad. He remained silent. He learned how to stand again after surgeons told him he probably wouldn't. Another pause. He won't be broken by your accounting. His expression finally shifted. Not fear, recognition. Because he realized I wasn't negotiating anymore. I glanced toward the ballroom entrance where Mr. Clayton Rutherford would soon present the symbolic insurance check. Then back to Dad. But you? I checked my watch. You have 10 minutes. I held his gaze without blinking. Before the underwriter signs that ledger. The words settled over the garden like absolute silence. For the first time in my life, Garrick Sterling looked at me and understood that no amount of money, intimidation, or emotional blackmail was going to change what happened next. And for the first time in his life, he realized he was the one running out of time. I lowered my hand from my watch, turned away from my parents, and started walking toward the mansion. Sloan. Dad's voice followed me. I didn't stop. Lenore hurried after me. Please, just think about this. I already did. You'll regret it. I doubt that. The gravel crunched beneath my combat boots with the same steady rhythm I'd heard on military bases across 3 continents. Every step sounded louder now, not because I was walking harder, but because I finally knew where I was going. Behind me, Dad called out again. You are making a catastrophic mistake. I kept walking. You'll destroy everything. No, I answered without looking back. You already did. The front entrance stood wide open. 2 valets were helping guests inside while another collected car keys from a couple climbing out of a silver Rolls-Royce. One of the younger valets noticed me first. His eyes immediately dropped to my uniform, then to the medals. His posture changed instinctively. He stepped aside without saying a word. Military uniforms still carried weight in places where character sometimes didn't. I climbed the front steps. The massive oak doors stood open beneath polished brass lanterns. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the sound beneath my boots changed. Gravel disappeared. Imported Italian marble answered each step with a sharp, clean echo. Click, click, click. Every sound bounced off the ceilings and stone walls. A housekeeper arranging flowers near the foyer looked up. The vase almost slipped from her hands. "Captain," she recognized me, not from newspapers, from years of working in this house. She had packed sandwiches into my backpack before high school field trips. She'd secretly mailed homemade cookies to my unit overseas because she knew my mother never would. Tears filled her eyes. "I knew," she stopped herself, then quietly whispered, "I knew you weren't gone." I gave her a small nod. "Thank you." It was the first genuine kindness received since arriving home, and it came from someone my parents barely acknowledged existed. The ballroom doors remained open ahead. Warm light spilled into the foyer. I could hear Mr. Clayton Rutherford speaking into the microphone. Alliance Mutual remains committed to supporting families through life's most difficult moments. Good timing. The symbolic presentation had already begun. I continued forward. Guests standing near the entrance slowly noticed me. Conversation faded one table at a time. A waiter froze in the middle of pouring champagne. A violinist missed 2 notes before lowering her instrument completely. People stared. Not dramatically, just confused. Uniform, medals, scar across my cheek. Someone whispered, "Is that? No, it can't be." The whispers spread faster than the music had. I walked through them without changing pace. Halfway across the foyer, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Dad. He caught my arm, not violently. Firmly enough to stop me. I turned slowly. His public smile had disappeared. "Don't do this. I am doing it. We can still solve this privately. You've had 6 months. His fingers tightened slightly. "Listen to me. I already have. You don't understand how many innocent people this will affect. I've been hearing that all evening. It's true. I know exactly who the innocent people are." He glanced toward the ballroom. Several guests were beginning to notice us now. His voice dropped lower. "If you walk through those doors, I will. There's no going back." I looked at his hand gripping my sleeve. "You should let go." "No. People are watching. I don't care." He leaned closer. His smile returned. "Only for appearances." To anyone watching, we probably looked like a father sharing a private emotional moment with his military daughter. In reality, his words carried nothing but pressure. "You owe this family. I fulfilled my oath. You owe your mother. I owed her honesty. You owe your brother." I almost laughed. "No." His jaw flexed. "You owe me." That sentence erased whatever remained of the conversation. I gently removed his hand from my sleeve. "No, Garrick." I used his first name deliberately. "I don't." Lenore finally reached us. Her breathing was uneven. "Sloane, people are looking. They should." She grabbed my wrist. "Please. I've heard that word enough tonight. We can fix this. By declaring me alive tomorrow, we'll explain everything." With another forged document, she let go immediately. Dad stepped directly into my path. This time there was no attempt to hide it. He physically blocked the ballroom entrance. Behind him, I could see the stage. Mr. Clayton Rutherford stood beside an oversized ceremonial check displaying the Alliance Mutual logo. Several photographers had gathered near the front, city officials, corporate board members, television cameras from local news stations. Dad spread his arms slightly. "You are not walking in there. I am. I won't allow it." The irony almost made me smile. After everything he'd done, he still believed permission belonged to him. Guests closest to the entrance had gone completely silent. Nobody could hear our entire conversation, but everyone could see enough to know something was wrong. I took one step closer until only inches separated us. His breathing had become noticeably faster. Mine hadn't changed. Years in combat teach you how to control oxygen long before they teach you how to fire a weapon. I held his eyes, then spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. "Step aside, Garrick." He didn't move. I continued in the same calm voice. "Or the Federal Fraud Division handles this in front of your board." Every trace of confidence disappeared from his face. Not because I had raised my voice, because he knew I was right. If he stopped me here, if security became involved, if local police arrived. The investigation would begin before the insurance company even had time to leave the property. He looked toward the ballroom, then back at me. For the first time that evening, Garrick Sterling understood that he no longer controlled the next move. After 3 long seconds, he stepped aside. Not out of respect, out of necessity. I walked past him without another word. The echo of my combat boots rolled across the marble foyer toward the ballroom, where nearly 300 members of Savannah's elite were waiting to celebrate the memory of a woman who had just walked back into her own funeral. I stepped through the ballroom doors without slowing down. The hinges gave a low, familiar groan that disappeared almost instantly beneath the last words of Mr. Clayton Rutherford's speech. An Alliance Mutual all is honored to support families whose loved ones have made the ultimate sacrifice. He reached for the oversized ceremonial check resting on the easel beside him. That was when someone near the back of the room gasped. Every head turned. The ballroom held nearly 300 people only seconds earlier. Now it felt like one person had taken a single breath. My combat boots struck the polished marble with measured rhythm as I walked straight down the center aisle. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The crystal chandeliers above reflected off the medals on my Army service uniform. The Purple Heart caught the light first, then the Combat Action Badge, then the Bronze Star with Valor. The reflections danced across the ceiling while the room remained completely still. A photographer lowered his camera. One flash had already gone off before he realized what he was seeing. The second never came. I recognized faces as I passed. The mayor, several judges, board members from Sterling Maritime Holdings, retired military officers, bank presidents, people who had applauded my memorial only minutes earlier. Now they looked from me to the enormous portrait hanging behind the stage, then back to me again. One woman whispered, "That's her." Another answered, "No." An older veteran sitting near the front slowly stood without taking his eyes off my uniform. He didn't salute, he simply removed his cap. Respect didn't require instructions. Behind me, I could hear hurried footsteps. Dad, Mom, neither one tried to speak. They already understood that words no longer mattered. Mr. Rutherford hadn't noticed the disturbance yet. He was signing the final presentation folder with an expensive black fountain pen. A representative from Alliance Mutual stood beside him smiling for the cameras. I continued walking. Halfway to the stage, every conversation in the ballroom had ended. Even the air conditioning system suddenly seemed louder than the crowd. Mr. Rutherford finally looked up. At first, he appeared mildly annoyed by the interruption. Then his eyes settled on my uniform. He frowned. Recognition didn't happen immediately. Professional investigators don't jump to conclusions. They compare, evaluate, confirm. His gaze moved to my nameplate, Sterling, then to my rank, Captain, then to the scar running across my left cheek. His expression changed. He knew exactly where he'd seen my face before. Not at this gala, inside a file. A classified service summary attached to the insurance investigation. The pen slipped from his fingers. It struck the hardwood stage with a sharp click that echoed through the silent ballroom. Nobody bent to pick it up. Mr. Rutherford took one slow step away from the podium. His eyes never left me. "Captain." His voice barely carried. "Sloane Sterling?" I stopped at the foot of the stage. "Yes, sir." Dramatic speech. No accusation. Just 2 words. The room seemed to freeze around them. "Mr." Rutherford looked at me for another long second. Then at the portrait hanging 20 feet behind him. Then toward Garrick and Lenore. His entire posture stiffened. Years earlier, before joining Alliance Mutual's Executive Investigation Division, he'd served as a reserve officer assigned to military legal support. I'd read that in his professional biography while researching him in the guest house. Old habits don't disappear. Neither does respect for the uniform. His shoulders squared automatically. His heels came together. His right hand rose sharply, not toward my face, toward the medals on my chest, a perfect military salute. Crisp, immediate, without hesitation. The sound of his palm striking the edge of his brow seemed louder than the orchestra had all evening. Every retired service member in the room recognized it instantly. Several unconsciously straightened their own posture. Mr. Rutherford held the salute. "Captain Sterling." His voice was firm now. "Welcome home." I returned the salute. "Thank you, sir." He lowered his hand and turned toward the Alliance Mutual legal team. His expression had completely changed. The sympathy was gone. The ceremony was over. Only the investigator remained. He addressed the room clearly enough that every guest could hear. Effective immediately, he reached toward the ceremonial check and removed it from the easel. This insurance transaction is permanently frozen. Gasps spread across the ballroom. The photographers finally remembered they were holding cameras. Flashes exploded from every direction. Mr. Rutherford continued, Alliance Mutual has just verified that Captain Sloane Sterling is alive. He looked directly at Garrick. And the company has substantial reason to believe material representations made during this claim process may have been false. No shouting, no theatrics, just professional language. Somehow that made it even worse. He turned toward one of his attorneys. Secure every document. Another investigator nodded immediately. No paperwork leaves this property. Yes, sir. Mr. Rutherford faced me again. Captain, if you're willing, we'd appreciate your cooperation after this gathering concludes. You'll have it. He gave one short nod. Then looked back at the audience. This event is no longer a charitable presentation. Another pause. It is now part of an active insurance fraud investigation. The silence shattered. Guests immediately stepped away from my parents as though distance alone could erase association. Several board members exchanged alarmed looks. One banker quietly handed his champagne glass to a waiter and headed for the exit without saying goodbye. Two television reporters who had been covering the charity galas suddenly began speaking urgently into their microphones. The story had changed. Completely. I turned toward my parents. Mom stood frozen. The color had vanished from her face. Her diamond necklace suddenly looked heavy enough to pull her toward the floor. Dad opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in my life, Garrick Sterling had no argument left, no negotiation, no leverage, no control. Lenore reached for his arm. He reached for hers. Neither one found solid balance. Their knees gave way almost together. She collapsed first. He followed less than a second later. Both hit the polished marble floor beneath the enormous portrait they had used to convince Savannah that their daughter was gone forever. The photographer nearest the stage instinctively captured the moment. Not because it was dramatic, because history has a habit of documenting the exact second a carefully built lie finally runs out of places to stand. I looked down at the two people who had exchanged my life for an insurance claim. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry anymore. I simply felt finished. The hardest battle I'd fought all year hadn't happened 6,000 miles away. It had happened in my own family home, and unlike every mission before it, this one hadn't required me to save anyone except myself. I lowered my salute after Mr. Rutherford returned his, and the ballroom erupted into the kind of noise that only follows absolute silence. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. People started making phone calls. Alliance Mutual's legal team moved faster than anyone else in the room. Two investigators collected every presentation folder from the stage. Another photographed the ceremonial check before sealing it inside an evidence sleeve. A fourth requested copies of the event's guest list from the catering manager. Mr. Rutherford didn't waste a single motion. He turned toward Garrick and Lenore, who were being helped into chairs after collapsing. For the record, he said calmly, Captain Sterling's appearance establishes that the factual basis of this claim has materially changed. One attorney beside him nodded while opening a laptop. Mr. Rutherford continued, Alliance Mutual is immediately referring this matter to federal authorities for investigation into potential wire fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. No dramatic threats, no shouting. Just procedure. That frightened my parents more than anger ever could. Dad finally found his voice. This is a misunderstanding. Mr. Rutherford looked at him. Then you'll have every opportunity to explain it. I can. I'm sure your attorney will advise you. He didn't ask another question. He simply walked away. Professional investigators know when conversations belong in conference rooms instead of ballrooms. Several members of Sterling Maritime's board quietly gathered near one corner of the room. None of them approached Dad. One director removed his Sterling Maritime lapel pin and slipped it into his pocket before leaving. Another shook his head once and followed him. The distance between powerful people grows very quickly when federal investigators appear. Wyatt stood alone near the stage. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. He answered one call. I know. Another. No, don't liquidate yet. 30 seconds later, another. What do you mean the accounts are frozen? His voice became louder. You can't do that without notifying. The caller hung up. He stared at the phone. Then another message arrived. His face lost what little color remained. I didn't need to read the screen. I already knew. Creditors had been waiting. Knights and simply gave them permission. By the end of the week, his offshore logistics company would be under court supervision, its assets frozen while lenders fought over whatever remained. The business he claimed would revolutionize international shipping had collapsed faster than the speech introducing it. Mom tried standing again. Two women she had chaired charity galas with for nearly 15 years quietly stepped aside instead of helping. One looked genuinely uncomfortable. The other simply avoided eye contact. Status is expensive. Trust is priceless. Lose one, and people gossip. Lose the other, and people disappear. Within an hour, the ballroom that had been full of laughter looked almost abandoned. Half-finished champagne glasses remained on cocktail tables. Dinner plates sat untouched. Musicians packed away their instruments without waiting for instructions. The enormous portrait of me still hung behind the stage. Nobody bothered taking it down. Mr. Rutherford approached me one last time. "Captain, sir, I appreciate your cooperation tonight. I appreciate yours." He handed me a business card. "If federal investigators need additional statements, they'll contact you through my office. I'll make myself available." He looked briefly toward my parents, then back at me. "I've handled insurance investigations for 23 years. I waited. I've seen families make terrible decisions under financial pressure." Another pause. "But I've never seen parents file paperwork like this." "Neither had I." He extended his hand. I shook it. "Welcome home. Thank you." This time the words actually meant something. By the time the last investigator left, the mansion had become almost silent. The silence felt familiar, not painful, honest. I returned to the guest house one final time. My duffel bag sat exactly where I'd left it. It took less than 5 minutes to pack. One army uniform, one tactical pack, one deployment notebook. A few photographs of people who had become family by choice instead of blood. That was enough. Funny how little you actually own after spending years moving between military assignments. I carried the bag back outside. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. The front doors of the mansion remained open behind me, but I never looked back. Some places stop being home long before you leave them. A government vehicle waited beyond the front gate. My next assignment would take me to Washington, where I had accepted a leadership position overseeing medical readiness for special operations units. New soldiers, new responsibilities. A future that no longer depended on anyone's approval. Before getting into the vehicle, I walked toward the old live oaks overlooking the river. Those trees had witnessed birthday parties, family arguments, graduation photographs, and now the collapse of everything my parents had tried so desperately to protect. Morning light slowly spread across the water. The river didn't care about insurance claims. It didn't care about family names. It simply kept moving. I rested one hand against the rough bark of the nearest oak and finally allowed myself one long, quiet breath. Combat had taught me how to survive. Home had taught me something harder. You can survive people who never deserved your loyalty. The medals on my chest hadn't changed overnight. Neither had the scars beneath the uniform. What changed was the boundary I finally chose to defend. I understood then that dignity could never be audited, negotiated, or purchased, and honor wasn't something you displayed during a charity gala. It was something you carried every single day, whether anyone applauded or not. I climbed into the government vehicle and watched the Sterling estate disappear in the side mirror. It became smaller with every mile. Eventually, it disappeared completely. Not because I forgot it, because I no longer needed to carry it. For my entire life, I believed that love was a silent negotiation of compliance. That if I compressed my own achievements to fit into the background of my brother's shadows, I was protecting the peace of the family. I went to war so they could stay safe, and I stayed silent so they could look successful. But the porch of my father's house taught me a lesson that no combat deployment ever could. Sacrifice without boundaries is not humility. It is an invitation to entitlement. When you allow the people who raised you to treat your existence as a transaction and your death as an asset, you are not being a loyal daughter. You are simply building the very cage they keep you in. My parents measured human worth by the weight of an unearned title, the luster of a diamond necklace, or the convenience of an insurance ledger. They could not see the steel inside their own daughter because their hands had only ever learned to grip things that came with a price tag. But true honor cannot be bought at a surplus store. And respect is not a currency you can extort over an anniversary dinner. The medals on my chest were earned, in rooms they would have been too frightened to stand in. But it was the quiet boundary I drew on a Saturday afternoon that finally set me free. We do not owe our silence to keep our abusers warm. Sometimes the most loving, dignified thing you can do is to stop holding up a roof that was built to crush you, set the weight down, and walk out into the clean, honest light. If this story stayed with you, don't leave just yet. The video already waiting on your screen tells another true-to-life family story where one quiet decision changed everything. It's one of the most watched stories on this channel, and once you see how that family secret unraveled, you'll understand why so many viewers watched both stories back to back.